Hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest episodes of Podcast Para sa Bayan. Of course, today a little bit cozier than usual, but we are hoping to be joined by the rest of the gang in the coming days and weeks as we wrap up this year and we try to do analysis, maybe year-ender analysis, what were the highlights in Philippine foreign policy, and obviously also looking at what are the things that we should look forward to in 2024 or not so look forward to or be worried about in next year. Today, again, we're joined by Justin. Thank you very much, Justin, for joining us again.
Hello, Richard. Good evening at magandang gabi also to all our viewers.
Maraming salamat. It's always a pleasure having you, Justin, there. I mean, of course, folks who have been following you on Twitter and different platforms are pretty aware that you're almost as ADHD as me in terms of making sure you're always on top of the latest developments. Now, before we go to I don't know, our good friends Robin Hood Padilla going to SMNI, and anyway, let's talk about what happened over the weekend, which is a situation whereby two things happened, not one, right? One is water cannoning of a ROR mission, resupply mission to the Second Thomas Shoal. That's not necessarily the first time that happened, but I think for the first time we had the military chief of the Philippines, the Armed Forces of the Philippines Chief of Staff, Bronner there. So that kind of makes the situation different. Also, for the first time, we had a Christmas convoy of civil society groups going there, and they were really bullied and forced to turn around. Having said that, is this variation on a theme, or we're really seeing what the National Security Council and some of our friends in the governments are calling an escalation? Is this something really worrying to you, Justin? What is your assessment of the situation right now?
Yeah, actually, I do agree with the characterization of escalation for two things. No? Siguro, on the one hand, the tactics have always remained the same. No? So this is really the same old problems. No? Yung water cannoning incident, yung use of even yung acoustic device against the Coast Guard. And also, ang problema kasi this time around, those tactics led to a collision incident with a Philippine vessel, which China claims to be a scratching incident, not trying to downplay the significance of that event, which of course is from a policy perspective significant yon kasi we do have a mutual defense treaty with the United States, and it doesn't really distinguish whether an attack is intentional or not. No, so we are really looking at whether there is harm done on Philippine public vessels, which in this case, actually, to be frank about it, really happened. It just so happened na hindi siya lethal at this point in time. But what this does show us is that yung gray zone tactics by China are not actually as safe, or yung below the threshold of
They're
conflict.
not so gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not so gray anymore. So the tactics can actually be lethal. It actually led to the disablement of one of the Philippine vessels. Nasira yung engine eh. And additionally, of course, according to the AFP, hindi alam ng China that one of the boats that they collided with and water cannon actually had the Chief of Staff ng Armed Forces of the Philippines. So in that respect, all of these tactics by China are finally, backfiring onto it, because it keeps on doing these actions in the past few years. Nobody's opposing it. And now that the Philippines is doing what any proper country should be doing, including resupplying its own military vessels, a force projecting within its own territory, or at least within its EEZ. All of these things are routine activities by the state. And China is the one that has deliberately chosen to intercept those missions. So that, I think, is where the escalation is. The tactics remain the same, but China's policy has actually exacerbated the situation. If we take a look at the situation kasi, yung behavior ng China toward the Philippines is actually very unusual. And no doubt about it, it's because it's trying to undermine the credibility of the foreign policy of the current Marcos government. If we think about it, China has not responded like this when Vietnam builds some of its military facilities in the South China Sea. China has also not responded like this, for example, to...
You think, Justin, they're out here to embarrass us? Is this your reading?
Yes.
They're really hard to teach us a lesson. To school us, kumbaga.
Actually, yung embarrassment is only a means to an end. What does the embarrassment actually show about China's tactic? It's actually adopting a zero-tolerance approach to the Philippines right now. It's not doing that against other Southeast Asian claimant states. Ginagawa lang to specifically para mapahiya yung administration. So that is really the logic behind it.
Now, you have a good point, because for me, we're perhaps somewhere in between gray zone and arm attack. It's a totally new category that I think we have to look at. So I can always say the gray zone is a 50 shades, but this is a very dark shade that is really just short of arm attack. Because it's very easy to say, oh, it's gray zone because it's not arm attack. It's just below threshold, but there are levels to below threshold, right? And this is really reaching the tipping point. We're almost crossing the red line here. But at the same time, I mean, Justin, doesn't this also expose the limits of the Philippine-US treaty alliance? Because every time something like this happens, including this latest incident, which you and I both agree is something of a different order of magnitude and coming from a different policy point of reference, they come up with the same statement. Any arm attack on Philippine vessels, soldiers, aircraft, whatever, will invoke them. Okay, yeah. But obviously that's not what China is doing. But it's not like what China is doing is anything like your typical gray zone harassment. This is something north of that harassment. So don't you think this is a time for another, I don't know, revision of guidelines or even the US to change tone? Because I see friends in DC also coming out and saying it's like, yeah, I mean, like, parang hindi sapat eh. We cannot just, the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing, expecting to get a different outcome. Because clearly China is not only here to school the Philippines, it's also here to embarrass US and show the limits of the Philippine-US alliance. So either there's something wrong with the alliance or the US itself is not willing to appreciate the nature of the threat on the ground. I mean, what is your reading on this situation, the implications for the great power rivalry aspect and alliance aspect?
I think ilagay natin siya in context, no? I think the problem right now with the situation is both the Philippine and the US governments have been very much sold into this idea of assertive transparency being the end-all be-all of the strategy sa West Philippine Sea. Meaning to say, tumigil tayo with exposing China's aggressive behavior in the South China Sea. Tumigil tayo with just garnering international sympathy. Pero if you look at it on the ground, for example, during these incidents, wala namang specific request yung Philippine side actually from the United States on what exactly is to do. And from what I've heard during these recent incidents, the request that came from the government was for foreign governments to issue statements sympathizing with the Philippine position. So the question is, transparency na nga lang ba talaga yung end goal natin dito, really? So it's a question of appropriate ba yung ganong strategy of name and shame to an actor like China, which frankly is, shameless. It's really shameless.
It's at the same.
Kaya nga siya, it's engaging in all these behaviors in the South China Sea. It cannot be named and shamed as the ultima ratio ng policy natin. So ngayon, we're now forced into a question. Ano ngayon yung operational response that is appropriate to this? So for example, merong questions of whether the Philippines should call on the US to shadow Philippine vessels during resupply missions. I think that's a concrete way of trying to operationalize and put teeth to the US-Philippine alliance. Although of course, that's still up for debate kasi nga, ang position ng AFP dito is that all these sovereign missions should be solely conducted ng Pilipinas. Which, to some extent, I would agree to that, no? But different case kasi, yung South China Sea, merong parts lang niyan yung kiniklaim ng Philippines as part of our territory or as part of our EEZ. Most parts of that would be considered as international waters, which yun yung tinatry natin to invite actors like Australia, US, Japan to conduct military exercises in, because kung international waters yun, they should be able to operate in those areas without harassment from China. So that is medyo mas okay na nag-i-invite tayo ng foreign presence in those areas which we do also consider as international waters. So that's where we stand right now with respect to this. But I think yung bottom line talaga dito is kailangan natin to go beyond this paradigm of yung assertive transparency, because fundamentally talaga actually I think mali nga yung naging rhetoric dito ng NTF-WPS about it, because really our true strategy sa West Philippine Sea is what we call offshore balancing, right? This has been a similar strategy nung panahon ni President Aquino, which was also continued under President Duterte, which is to rely on a big external power to help augment yung security forces natin to balance out yung forces on the ground versus China, which is why we're inviting all of these international actors to join with us in an international coalition to help protect Philippine territory and its exclusive economic zone. So that is really what the strategy is. So at the end of the day, it involves force projection. So it doesn't stop at calling out China, hey, you're doing the wrong behavior. It actually involves we need to leverage on deploying our own forces and if necessary, bringing in other forces as well to increase yung deterrent value ng posture natin with respect to China.
To what degree is this also about, because we're all reaching the moment of truth, right, on the Sierra Madre situation, and I get your point about Vietnam doing its own militarization, Malaysia, having built its own golf courses in lying. I mean, I get it, but I mean, how should I put it? I mean, this, like, the problem is that this thing is so publicized that both sides have dug themselves into a position of
Yes.
non-compromise, right? And the fact
Exactly.
that we're bringing other powers in, there's also this aspect of China trying to say to its own people and other allies and potential rivals that, hey, we're not going to be intimidated. You can bring in half of the world. We're still going to stand up. And the more these people you're bringing in are Western, whether Japanese, for them are Western, Australian, American, European, the more this is easy for us to say, this is us against the world. Kind of like how Putin kind of portrayed himself as a victim. Like one of the most preposterous things in the war in Ukraine is Putin saying we are the victim.
Victim talaga.
You get what I'm saying? Yung mga kapalmoks na ganyan moves, diba? So I'm just saying, a lot of that is because inadvertently, as we try to publicize the issue more, the more it incentivizes both sides to dig themselves into a position of non-compromise, right? So
Exactly.
it's kind of like a chicken game. We walk ourselves into a chicken game, isn't it? I mean, that's the worry I
Pero
have.
actually, may response ako niyan. I was just writing about this exact topic this afternoon na pag trinace natin, no, saan nga ba talaga nanggaling yung escalation spiral na ito? And ako, personally I think it's a misstep on the part ng China to have continued with these policies of zero tolerance against the Philippines, knowing full well that, kahit hindi naman si President Marcos ang presidente, the Philippines is still going to conduct a resupply mission for BRP Sierra Madre. They can downplay it as much as they want. But even during the Duterte administration, 2019, nagkaroon tayo ng swarming incident dyan. The Duterte administration had to respond to it. Secretary Lorenzana had to respond to it. But yung point kasi dyan is, yung China, because of yung bagong zero tolerance approach niya to the Philippines, kasi, China has been saying, nakakapag-resupply naman kayo dyan nung panahon ni President Duterte and there was no problem, which exactly proves my point. In short, yung resupply ng BRP Sierra Madre does not actually have any strategic value for China, right? The Philippines can resupply the BRP Sierra Madre all we want, and China will still have a dominance in terms of the force presence in the area. So actually, for all intents and purposes, China can just let these resupply missions continue, and it will not incur any damage in reality, it will not incur any damage to its military position. But it has chosen to respond to each and every resupply mission. And I think that's where the problem is. Kasi it put itself into that position. And recently, meron sa balita na in-announce ni Senator Angara that the Philippines allotted budget in 2024 to construct a permanent facility sa Ayungin Shoal. So in that respect, actually, we already have all the ingredients for an impending crisis already there. Kasi yung China has already said, you cannot bring in construction materials in that area. Yung Philippines naman, we have been forced into a corner to respond with these kinds of actions kasi nga, hindi nga nila pinapayagan yung resupply missions eh. So, basically, they allow nothing, no? Yung nangyari ng last weekend, Saturday and Sunday, China blocked even yung resupply mission for Filipino fishermen. No? So, that's not even a military activity. That's for Filipino fishermen na binigyan ng oil and gas supposedly dapat ng BIFAR, no? But they also prevented that. So China is signaling to the Philippines this all or nothing mindset that we will not allow any activity whatsoever. So kung hindi rin pala i-allow ng China yung any activity by the Philippines, then the Philippines is more willing to take on risks and gamble. And I think that's where the escalation spiral is starting kasi the Philippines is being boxed into a position where it has no choice.
Game. I mean,
Exactly.
It's a chicken game. I mean, this is a classic bully trying to just stare down a smaller country and say, oh, you got your friends. Let's see who your friends are. Let's see what they can bring. And for me, again, the context matters here, no? And this is where I really blame Duterte, because one of the worst legacies of the Duterte era was the psychological legacy. Domestic front is the psychology of bara-bara drug war. It's a psychology of pwede mong bastusin kahit sinong tao and you're gonna look cool. On the geopolitical front, I think the psychology there was almost the complete opposite. The Philippines is our toy. Diba? That's how the Chinese got. We can just manipulate them anyway. We got our guy there in the Malacanang. Like he essentially spoiled China by being such a
Exactly. I actually agree, no? Kasi
subservient
I think
guy. Yeah, exactly.
during the Duterte administration, there were so many concessions to China. For example, yung Gemver incident na nabangga yung Filipino fishing mga fisher folk natin doon, no? The Philippine government, including si what's his name, yung dating head ng PDP Laban, si Secretary Cusi, I think, went on the ground to try to
Department of
smoothen
Energy
things.
Secretary, yeah.
Yeah. Went on the ground, try to smoothen things so that the fishermen don't try to make a big issue out of that situation. So essentially, at that point in time, the Philippine government was doing China's work for it, right? Yung trying to do this public diplomacy thing. And they are doing it even without China requesting it. So there were so many concessions to China na hindi naman kailangan gawin ng Philippine government. And now, yun na yung naging bagong cognitive baseline ng China. It now expects every Philippine government down the line to continue to do the same types of actions, which is of course very unrealistic kasi nga China ended up believing its own propaganda. The Duterte administration in historical context is an anomaly. Pero ang nangyari, China is now using the expectations from that anomaly to describe what should be the new normal for
But
its
Justin,
relations
that
with the
anomaly
Philippines.
is still around. That anomaly,
Yes.
the daughter of that anomaly is the number 2, at least officially speaking. That anomaly himself is around and doing his own parallel freelancing diplomacy. That anomaly is openly coming out and bashing the government, spreading disinformation. That anomaly is on a TV channel, supposedly a media network, ranting right and left, and that anomaly is still popular. So if you're China, I don't think you're totally ridiculous, except your analysis is very low quality.
Yeah, exactly. And China, because China can see this, that, yung vice president is speaking out against some domestic policies of the president, it starts to think, maybe down the line, she will also do that for foreign policy, right? So, I think in that respect, hindi dapat I think the government is being a bit chaotic about this. There's no message discipline. So, kaya yung China, if you look at it, it's also, kung ikaw yung China, you will not really be deterred because you can see that yung Philippine government is fighting amongst itself. So now is the time to capitalize on the weakest link, no? Hahanapin ko dito, ano nga ba dito sino dito yung kaya kong ma-intimidate? And if that person that I can intimidate is someone who can change the policy, then I will keep on doing this type of policy. So yung Philippine government, because of all these internal squabbles, all of this, hindi natin tuloy ma-execute yung policy natin. We are appearing as weak to China right now, no? So, regardless na of what we think of the Duterte family about the merits of their China foreign policy, I think yung act na what they are doing right now in front of China, in front of the whole world, criticizing the administration, this has a very clear danger with respect to the China policy. Any president naman that's being contradicted by your VP and so forth, nagpe-present ka ng risk of appearing not to have a united front against your adversary, in this case, China.
So essentially, the argument there is that, we can have a debate about the merits of not over-relying on America, of calibrating our position towards China. But clearly, you cannot debate the negative impact of them acting as spoilers. In this case, the anomaly that was President Duterte, right? This anomaly is still around. He's ranting, he's raving, he's causing... he's spreading disinformation, he's causing discord, he's berating government officials, and he's giving this false idea to China that they still got a man not in Manila now, back to Davao, who they bring back to the palace one day, maybe not the daughter, so I see what your point is. That is the consequences of what the Dutertes are doing, which is very devastating for the country. Because katulad ng sinabi ng mga kaibigan natin na DDS back in the day, bakit di na lang kayo sumusuporta sa gobyerno? Bakit puro kayong nega? Suportahan natin ang ating presidente, di ba? Yan ang natin ko sinasabi sa kanila.
And just to be clear din naman sa mga sa mga nanonood. I think criticism of government is perfectly fine. But yung specifically what the Duterte family had done in recent months, no, yung pagpunta ni President Duterte in his personal capacity to visit Chinese President Xi Jinping, no,
With no
naunahan pa niya si
coordination with the
yeah,
DFA whatsoever.
naunahan pa niya si President Marcos at the time na meron tayong tensions with sa maritime tensions with China at the time. So, you know, that is really unprecedented and frankly uncourteous to the incumbent president, no? Si President Aquino disagreed as much as he did with the policy of President Duterte from 2016 to 2022. You never see President Aquino going to the United States and trying to, you know, say na the Philippine president is doing the wrong things and so forth, trying to have a private audience, let's say with Obama or Trump, no? Aquino never did any of that. So I think this is also a learning for other future presidents, not to try to undermine the incumbent in office, no. It should really
Especially
be an expectation, to be
right,
honest.
especially in this time, no. Well, I would blame also BBM. At some point, BBM should have come out and
Yeah,
drawn the
exactly.
line. That's the problem with being conflict avoidant. If you're so
Yeah.
conflict avoidant, you invite.
Pinayagan niya.
Yeah, he invited conflict by being conflict avoidant. Because if you look weak, even if he's not weak, I think he has a far better grasp of international politics. I think BBM has been far more courageous on West Philippine Sea than someone who called him a weak leader. But he should have drawn the line.
Exactly.
And the thing is, it's his proxies who are doing that for that. Attacking not the former president, but people around the former president or people closer to. So this proxy wars, I think the president should have come down and said, hey, ayusin niya, the country is suffering.
Exactly.
It's not good for the country. So I get that point. Ako naman, anong moral and intellectual ascendancy of that camp to come and lecture us on West Philippine Sea? They had 6 years in power. What did they get out of China aside from this phantom prevention of war supposed good thing that they, like China is not going to invade the Philippines? I mean, Aquino took them to international court from 2013 to 2016. There was no war. There was nothing like the Reed Bank incident whatsoever. There's absolutely no evidence that China will go to war because China is not, well, they're not Russia, they're not Putin. They're calculating, they're smart. Time is on their side. So in fact, Duterte was embarrassing Xi and Chinese leaders when they say, no, sabi nila, atakin tayo pag, you know, I asserted arbitration award. Like that kind of nonsense, right? That kind of duwag policy. Now the thing is, the 6 years, they got no big ticket infrastructure investments. They got no compromise in the West Philippine Sea. Recto Bank, Reed Bank incident happened in 2019. The Genver, the Juan Felipe Reef, Whitson Reef happened. So much so that that Pacquiao broke away from the president and new faction in PDP Laban came out. These 6 years, there was no debt trap. Dito mali yung opposition. There was pledge trap. Puro lang pledge lang China, nothing really coming. So, in short, they have the worst record of dealing with China of any Filipino president I know. I think Arroyo dealt way better with China. I think Ramos' karaoke diplomacy was way better with China. He sang karaoke with Jiang Zemin, but at the same time, he'll bring in Americans. At the same time, he'll work the ASEAN diplomacy. At the same time, he went for AFP modernization. Aquino, I had my disagreements with that administration already there, but at least once the Scarborough incident happened, they woke up, they did their job, they pushed for AFP modernization, we got the FA-50s, etc. So this is the worst record. The Duterte administration has the worst record when it comes to dealing with China of any Filipino administration. And for them to lecture Marcos Jr., who met Mao Zedong when he was probably younger than you and I, right? This is a guy who lived global diplomacy at the highest level. He was part of the mission together with his mom when they went to China to normalize these ties. Folks can refer to my interviews, 2 interviews I had with Ambassador Romualdez about this because he's a family friend. Of course, he's a close family of the Marcoses. So he knows about this. He was in Beijing when we normalized our ties with Maoist China in the 1970s. The fundamental problem with the Dutertismo logic on China is they do not understand geopolitics. In geopolitics, if you're weak or seen as weak or you're shooting yourself in the foot, you will be treated with contempt. And that's why he got nothing from China. Everyone, all of these pro-Duterte people are now citing Vietnam. I just wrote a piece about Vietnam. Who see Vietnam, because they're nice to China, they're getting BYD investment, blah, 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 blah. But my point is, there are many reasons why Vietnam is getting investments around China, including their geography. They're just next to Pearl. But the other thing is, Vietnam first established its red lines, fought for those red lines, got China's respect, and then dealt with them from a position of strength.
Exactly. They
After
used to
the
even have
relationship.
an active
Exactly.
military conflict, right?
Exactly. So my point, Justin, here is this is really, I think, where our episode should culminate is my advice to people na nagmamagaling dyan is ganito, for 6 years, ang baba ng tingin ng China sa atin dahil sa ginagawa ni Digong, dahil ang sabog ng alliance natin with US because of Digong, dahil yung US din, hindi ganun ka-reliable until 2019 when Pompeo said they will stand by us under these conditions and clarify the Mutual Defense Treaty provisions in a public way, in a specific South China Sea. But yun nga, yun ang point ko eh. So that means we need a year or two to remind China that Philippines, whoever is the president, you're not going to get another Digong, right? And this is not about Marcos Jr. This is not about Marcos funds and supposed. Kasi etong Justina, this is the conspiracy theory that comes out from my friends in China and Hong Kong. They keep on saying, oh, Marcos cut a deal with the Americans, didn't he? Kaya siguro pro-American siya. See how dismissive they are? And I said,
Exactly.
oh, now you care about the Marcos corruption. Where were you last year? Where were you when Duterte's good governance was being quite? Oh, now suddenly you guys are for good governance. Fantastic.
Kaya nga, I think, unsustainable talaga yung policy ng China with respect sa South China Sea ngayon. Kasi, parang kumbaga, hindi niya ma-imagine na any country will stand up to China in defense of its national sovereignty. Parang sa kanila, kapag nag-stand up ka, it must be something you have been bought or whatever. Pero, di ba, realistically,
because that's how they do it themselves, right? How do you think Hun Sen of Cambodia is good to them? Yeah. You think out of love and ideological alignment? No. Because Hun Sen gets like what, 1/3 of his budget from aid in China and whatever.
Yung difference lang kasi with the Duterte admin, if we really sum it up, no, talagang it had a very distorted view of independent foreign policy, no. Hindi nga siya hedging, it was really tilting toward China. Ngayon, for example, we have some political camps in the Philippines saying, bakit hindi tayo katulad ng Vietnam or India, for example, which is a bit more neutral toward China, a bit more distant toward the United States, medyo mas balanced. But if you look at those countries, di ba, kunyari yung India, yung border disputes nila with China, actually, it led to some casualties. They really stood for yung demarcation line nila in their northern border with China. And that led to some disputes, but it didn't, it didn't lead to the explosion of China-India ties. So yung interpretation nila ng independent foreign policy doesn't mean unarmed neutrality, right? For them, independent foreign policy means that you're not being too close to any particular camp, but at the same time you still stick up dun sa mga national security non-negotiables mo. But for the Philippine case, really, pag inisip mo talaga siya, itong resupply ng BRP Sierra Madre, itong pagpatrol natin of our EEZ, for example, these are operational non-negotiables for the Philippines. Kahit sinong presidente, they have to faithfully execute that function, no? So, kaya this is really where all the problem is coming to surface right now. Talagang the China policy toward the Philippines is wrong. Laging sinasabi that the Philippine policy toward China is wrong, but you also examine the other side. Tama ba yung policy ng China toward the Philippines? It has all the wrong assumptions from any reasonable Philippine administration. No? It's taking the extreme as the model for how it can conduct good relations. So how can it conduct good relations like that? So that's still up for debate. No? We'll see how things pan out. But for now, I don't think things are looking good for China. Public opinion in the Philippines is not with them.
Well, some oligarchs are raising concerns with, but no, I mean,
you might have seen
on this episode, we might need sponsors down the road. I mean, for me, what is our advice here? Because the way it looks to me is, okay, this is a little bit risky, this is a little bit scary, but this is the valley of tears that we have to go through to gain respect. We have to make it clear to China that we're not going to be intimidated, that we're not just an American lackey and we can do this on our own, and that whoever is the Filipino president, it's not going to be another Duterte. That was sui generis in the worst sense of the word. It's not going to happen again. It's time for you to adjust and accept situation on the ground and stop gaslighting the Philippines, because all we are doing is exercising our sovereign rights within our own exclusive economic zone. It is not the Philippines that is claiming 85% of the South China Sea Basin. The Philippines is just claiming what is within its own exclusive economic zone, right? I mean, that's all we're doing. for you, how do you see this? Should we just stick to the status quo, and what are the additions? What are the pluses we should bring in beyond this proactive transparency initiative and non-compromising ROAR missions?
I'll be very honest, no. I don't think we need to redraw all our plans. We just need to faithfully and continually execute them, no. Kasi at the end of the day, no, that's how deterrence is built. It's making sure that we credibly tell the other side that we are going to continue with these resupply missions despite your opposition. We are determined to do this. We will respond to you if you stop them. That's how you that's how you routinize itong mga resupply missions down the line, no. I don't think we need to really do anything new, to be honest, na ito, for example, you don't even need to, for example, invite American battleships in that area, etc. Although that's well within prerogative ng Philippines, no? If the situation calls for it, that's our sovereign right to bring in our allies. But at the end of the day, you don't need to immediately go to that escalation point. We just need to continue what we're doing. The problem talaga dito is how China is responding to routine Philippine activity. So that for me is the flashpoint regarding this conflict. In terms of the political sphere, dito ako medyo, I think the Marcos administration should work on. I think it should try to at least try to improve relations with China. Kasi ang nangyayari ngayon, so there are some inflammatory statements from the Philippine government, for example, na the next flashpoint is not Taiwan, it's the South China Sea, etc. So, kumbaga, it draws unnecessary attention to the Philippines without the concomitant actions on the ground. So yes, we're hyping up support na, this is an important issue that the international community should care about. Pero essentially, on the ground ba, what are we doing? I was looking at the statement today ng Westcom, ng AFP. Sabi ng AFP, yung swarming of Chinese ships in the second Thomas Shoal ngayon malapit sa BRP Sierra Madre. Sabi nila, it's not an invasion. Ano? I mean, I would leave it to them what kind of, mental gymnastics or justification they want to say it. I respect that kung ganun ang stratcom ng government natin. But for me, that's actually an indication na the Philippine government is trying to calm down the tensions as much as it can without compromising yung operational security ng Pilipinas. So, that's really the bottom line. We need to just continue doing all these things, maybe fine-tune some of the relations with China, and then try to figure out itong assertive transparency policy na ito, no. We could try to have a bit of a more muscular military presence on the ground, no. Example, yung sa Ayungin, yung sa atin ito Christmas convoy, no. I think I told si Commodore Tariela this in public na if you look at that incident, originally sabi ng Philippine government, don't do this convoy, it's risky at this point in time. But then because of the mounting public support for atin ito, eventually, no, they conceded, they supported it. Ngayon, by the time na sinuportahan nila yung convoy, sila na ngayon yung nagpupush dun sa captain ng ship to, yes, continue mo, tuloy nyo yung destination nyo, even if there is Chinese harassment. Had they done that from the very beginning, we would have avoided that very public humiliation that China preventing a convoy ironically named atin ito, which is
Right.
this is ours. No? It's a very politically significant event. So we will take some time to recover from that very public humiliation. So ngayon, ang nakikita ko in the future, what the Philippine government could do, once it decides to support convoys like that, it has to go all in. It has to ensure that those trips continue and they end successfully. Because the moment they say that we will allow this convoy, it's no longer a private activity, no? Kahit pa i-deny ng NTFWPs that it's a civilian mission, it becomes a public event and therefore deserving of the full support of our security sector. Kasi trabaho nila yan eh. 'Di ba? And we should avoid political humiliations to the country kung gagawin din pala natin yung mga convoys na yun to begin with. So I think we should just stay the course, no? Hindi
Right,
man siya,
exactly. We have to just go through this quite rough patch, but this is part of the growing up. This is the rite of passage for the Philippines strategically. I think
kasi yung
yeah.
danger naman dyan is we are goaded into escalating our actions. We don't have to escalate. We just have to continue what we've been doing. no? And we don't have to de-escalate in the sense na titigil mo yung mga convoy, titigil mo yung resupply missions just because there is this pushback from China right now. It's
That's
really
why there's diplomacy, right? I think
exactly
what we're looking at here is calibrated escalation, or at least calibrated assertiveness, if you can put it
yes,
that way, and
assertion.
operationally define that. On that note, thank you very much, Justin, for another fantastic discussion. I think this was very timely. There's a lot of posturing and sloganeering out there, but we have to really be serious about what's happening here and what should be the next step. Thank you very much for this. In next episode, let's discuss ASEAN. Let's discuss what should be done with China disinformation, with the whole Duterte unity implosion, because whether we want it or not, the future of West Philippines will also depend on future of our politics and how we deal with sharp power, disinformation, and threats to our democracy. Thank you very much, Justin.
Thank you.